What I like to do is, because I think you got already a nice overview of all kinds of taxpayer rights, my colleague Pascal Pistone gave a nice overview, but I was thinking already when I saw the program, I want to do a little bit something else at the end of the program, and not only from a tax administration point of view, but also a little bit from a compliant multinational. What are certain issues, what can be the case? And I will talk about a few definitions first, and I want to talk something about the ruling practice, but I want to say also something about corporative compliance, new kind of audit strategies. And Pasquale was also mentioning audits, but you see in many countries at this moment also a trend in more corporative compliance or horizontal monitoring, enhanced relations, it is different names, but for the same kind of new audit practices. Exchange of information, and of course what are the legal aspects of the civil law system. I will come back to this aspect. Cooperative compliance in this moment, and you see that in not only more pilots, but really programs that are almost embedded in the system. That is two front runners were the United Kingdom and the Netherlands. Now you see it is also applied by a lot of other countries, France, United States, I even heard here in Russia, in Italy. And that means that, of course, that is a system based that you will rely more on the internal financial information of a corporate. Because corporates is of course a very distinguished financial system, and when you can secure what's happening there, then you can have more time for the real talks and negotiations. The tax administration say that this has to be based on mutual trust. And also in my practice is, in the past when I worked for the Dutch tax administration, Dutch investigation, that you see there is of course a lot of compliant multinationals. They are not cheating with the bookkeeping system, it is more the interpretation of the law. Dus a tax administration wants to achieve by cooperative compliance, certainty by consultation, certainty by assessment, rapid processing of appeals, tax returns, cases, etc. Dus again, the timing factor is important. And also efforts to minimize audits and audit time. Pasquale Pistano was mentioning sometimes one audit per year. To tell you, in many countries, the audit density can be extremely low. When you can audit about, say, 4 or 5% of your companies, that is already a lot. But there is a difference that really the big multinationals get a kind of constant kind of attention. That is not one audit per year, that is just 365 days of attention.
It is one.
That is one, yes.
365.
Exactly. And I know that, for instance, the Dutch tax administration, the United Kingdom, has by the big multinationals just one account manager discussing on a daily basis practices. Sometimes they have even their office by a multinational. In the case of Shell, that's the case. And Unilever. That's what they want to achieve. And what is then also, of course, what the taxpayer, the multinational corporate, will get in return for it. Again, timing to speed up the process, less delays, and of course to create more certainty. But now, of course, I have made an overview about what are a little bit the relations between cooperative compliance and the ruling practice. And what I want to say in this slide, and I'm not repeating everything what is on it, but in cooperative compliance you will make an agreement with the taxpayer. The tax administration on one hand and the taxpayer on the other makes an agreement about all kinds of possible things, but it is based first on the internal tax control framework of the company. And then you want to discuss all kinds of outstanding issues. It is not only about that you say that the data or the internal tax systems are in order. It is also a kind of agreement that you want to bring to the agenda all kinds of new tax matters. And you make even agreements about that part. It is about the interpretation of the laws, or the interpretation of a tax treaty. And there you can see that there are elements in a ruling can be, of course, based on a cooperative compliance agreement. There are similarities between it. And I asked this question to several, not too many, but a few tax directors, also to a few persons from tax administration. I like always to see what is the real case, what is the practice, and everyone has a kind of different interpretation. Or a cooperative compliance agreement, is that a ruling or not? Or is, I even heard some people said, no, a part of the cooperative compliance agreement is a ruling, other parts are not. Because what kind of information you have to submit? When it's about the tax control framework, the internal system, it's clear that it's part of the ruling. When it's about the interpretation, new case, and it is. Dus there you see already a kind of confusion between two kind of categories, of two kind of definitions. What happens now and this is just an example of the EU, and my colleagues Dennis Weber and Pasquale Pistano are much more in it than I am, but that's of course the EU Directive of October was also that taking place in retroactively with 5 years that we have to give each other our rulings. That means from the 1st of January, with retroactively of 5 years, tax administrations in the EU will see each other's rulings. But in general, in law, you have to be very careful with retroactivity. Because most of the time, in many countries, it is the case only when there is an extensive abuse or misuse of existing regulation, repair, when there is a manifest error in the law, there is maybe a sudden acute problem that requires immediate solution, and also the retrospective period has to be so short as possible. Dus you see that it is a kind of limitation of taxpayers' rights. And I have seen in my country, for instance, that it is done very slow. Dus you have to be careful. Now you see with such a EU directive kind of overruling to say, okay, from the 1st of January we will of course transfer everything to each other. But that has of course implications. And as I say again, all the things also from a taxpayer's perspective. And I make it just a little bit briefer because we are at the end of the day, but just to give you this case, of course, in mind, but maybe as a nice memory this evening when you do other things, that you can say, is a cooperative compliance agreement, is that a ruling or not? Maybe in fact it is a ruling. But I know certain countries who will say, no, that isn't a ruling. That is, and I will discuss it later with Pasquale. And it depends also that, of course, it is a kind of soft law, cooperative compliance, that is not based on any legal system, and I can already say that the Scandinavian or the Dutch approach is completely different than the UK approach. And the UK approach is more systemized, it's more, of course, based on questionnaires, and in the Dutch Scandinavian ways, it is more based on an agreement, on interpretation. It's much more soft law. But of course, when this is unclear, you give already a kind of legal insecurity to your taxpayer. We mentioned before, and also Pasquale Pistano was mentioned this, is of course the limitation of taxpayers' right by abolishing the notification by exchange of information is of course already a limitation. And we have always made the distinction between, of course, compliant taxpayers and non-compliant taxpayers. And you can see that also by multinationals. Not all multinationals has the same kind of tax policy. When we talk about multinationals, this is of course one group, but I see also in many countries, especially the less developed countries, that sometimes the multinationals pay sometimes more the fair share of taxation, because there are also all kind of other entities, sometimes with the right political protection, who are not paying the taxes. So there is a variety of taxpayers. But I want to limit, of course, to the compliant taxpayers. But what Pasquale Pistano was also mentioning, naming and shaming is a part, of course, of the corporate social responsibility. And you see that differs per company. And just to give you an example, I was last year chairman of the Tax Transparency Award in the Netherlands. This for multinationals, of course, who are more transparent than others. And that is based on about 120 multinationals on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. And the year before, we saw only about 15% of the multinationals giving information in the annual report about taxation and about the tax policy position. Last year, that improved already to 48%. So there you see already that transparency without any implementation is already happening. But you should see also that attitude by corporate social responsibility by multinationals. Things are changing, but it is not always in the same level playing field. I say that you have to be very careful, of course, with retroactivity in legal systems, because it creates a kind of insecurity. Because things are done, because certain people are, of course, not compliant. But be careful that you not harm the compliant ones. That means also, based on this exchange of rulings, that of course, that is the whole idea that another country can say that this ruling is of course affecting me. So it can be also that it has an implication on the ruling itself, that is to be revoked or is amended based on the information get by another country. That means that the legal position, or say the position between a taxpayer, the multinational, and the tax administration in particular, has changed. And that is also can undermine trust. I'm not saying that it will happen all the time, but it can. Because that is what we have to take in account. I'm also saying that a ruling at this moment and a cooperative compliance agreement are concluded between two equal partners, the tax administration and a multinational. During this negotiation process, and again, not all rulings are based on a kind of avoidance. There are a lot of normal rulings in place. It gives a kind of certainty. What would have been the outcome if you have known in 2012 or 2013 that other countries would also look around over your shoulder, because they would have negotiated with more countries? Of course you can say transparency when you have nothing to hide, that won't harm you, but I can tell you when I have a talk with Pasquale in my office, I don't want that everyone is listening to us. We have no secrets, but it is a kind of, we want to keep it confidential. That is, but you mentioned a lot of things about confidentiality. There is also a difference, of course, even in the European Union, but between the knowledge of tax administrations. I heard, of course, you mentioned countries like Switzerland, very advanced tax administration. They have also a lot of harmonization issues. In our country, with 26 cantons, by the way. But that is, of course, a very professional tax administration. But there are also tax administration less advanced, and how they will deal with this information they will receive. And again, and that's more from an economic point of view, what will happen, of course, when multinationals are not eager anymore to make rulings? Because rulings are not only in the interest of a company, that can be in the interest of the tax administration, that can be also in the interest, of course, of investments and the tax positions. Again, I was thinking, because it was the end of the day, I want to throw something new in it. I can, of course, mention all the things from only the tax administration perspective, but I thought it is sometimes also nice to see the other side of the coin, because there are a lot of things what they are on the right track, I think the right trend, but I'm not hearing that all the time.
Question. So now we have not just a Dutch sandwich taxation, but also Dutch tax family, two partners, multinational and tax authorities. Family, equal. Okay.
Yeah, you like it?
I don't know. I should think about this.
Now, it is also nice to see in this moment that due to IT systems and by auditing practices, that you see that multinationals and some tax administration coming to each other more and more. They work together. And therefore you see that also that the tax advisory has to invent, of course, new models. And one of the things is the whole idea of tax assurance. And tax assurance to secure what's happening in that relationship between this, of course, two giants, the tax administration and multinationals. Also, the tax advisory has to reinvent themselves in the compliance issue to assure their position. And they call it tax assurance.
Okay, thank you.